Hey everybody, it's Marson here, Director of Land Protection and Stewardship for Northwest Arkansas Land Trust. Thank you for joining us on our third and final Birding 101 video out here at Wilson Springs Preserve. It's a little windy and a little cloudy today. It looks like we may get some rain a little later on. And it's been in the low to mid 90s, which is not the best birding weather at all, but there are birds out here. As you can probably hear behind me, we're in a very urban area. So Wilson Springs is 121 acres completely surrounded by developments. We've got neighborhood on three sides. We've got Sam's Club on one of those sides. And we also got I-49 and Shiloh that run on the south side of the property. Being a city slicker, I find that incredibly fascinating that this ecosystem kind of remains here amongst all this urbanized and developed area, and it's one of the things that the Land Trust really likes to do is save these large patches of remnant ecosystem and make them available for the public to get out on. So I originally was going to talk about my top 10 favorite bird species out here, but I'm going to change that up a little bit after consideration and walking through the property a lot here recently. I think what would be cooler is for me to tell you about the different habitat types out here and the different bird species you're likely to see out here. Wilson Springs is a 121 acre wet prairie. It's one of the largest prairie remnants in the region. It's also the largest wetland in Fayetteville, so there's a lot of different little microhabitats out here that are really interesting to explore and to bird. Really, the story of Wilson Springs kind of goes like this. It was historically tallgrass prairie maintained by fire and possibly large grazing herbivores such as bison. It had been farmed in the late 1800s and up through the 20th century and the 21st century up until just a decade ago. It had been grazed by cattle. Thus cattle had actually helped to keep the area a lot more open than it actually is today. So with the removal of those cattle, we got a forest basically that grew up where a forest shouldn't be, and so we have a lot of tree species that we manage for and are trying to eliminate right now. We've got what we consider native invasives such as green ash and red cedar, which are native to the area but they're not really appropriate for the site. And then we've got quite a few invasive species that we're trying to remove from the site too. So the big three out here are bush honeysuckle, Callery pear, and Chinese privet. So the more of that woody biomass we can remove from the site, the more sunlight reaches the ground and the more opportunity for our native seed bank to produce all those native wildflowers and grasses and forbs that we're trying to get back. And so really we spent a lot of time out here managing for those species and trying to restore. We still have a lot of work to do, but we've done a lot of good work over the past 10 years. So I'm proud of the site. I'm proud of the work the Land Trust has done out here, and it's a really unique site. As far as habitat types go, we're going to go through just a few of them. There's lots of cool little areas around the property. Our trail system doesn't take you to every one of them right now because we are kind of in an active restoration phase. But our trails do allow you to get to a lot of the sites. We have about 2 miles of trails out here total. Really, the ecosystems that I'm going to focus on today are kind of our open prairie habitat. We've recently worked to remove trees from about 5 acres out here and to create an open prairie area, and we're getting a lot of cool stuff plant-wise coming back. We've also got some woodland out here. We're trying to reduce the density of the woodland and create more of a savanna. We don't want to eliminate all the trees out here because they are such good habitat, but we want to get to 25 trees an acre or less out here to make it more of an open savanna. With that open savanna, you'll get a lot of those grassland species coming back, which is important for bringing back a threatened ecosystem in our region. We've also got Clabber Creek that runs basically the length of the property right through the middle. Clabber Creek, it joins the Wilson Springs Run, for which the property is named. Wilson Springs actually starts underneath I-49, and it runs onto the property and meets at a confluence with Clabber Creek. And those ecosystems are really cool to bird several times of the year for ducks and waterfowl, which is really interesting. We've also got a pond that beavers created. It was a seasonal depression that stayed pretty wet most of the time, but beavers dammed it up and basically created a permanent shallow pool of water. That's another sweet place to bird for a lot of waterfowl in the wintertime. So without further ado, I'm going to take you around and show you some of these habitat types and tell you about some of the birds that you're likely to see out here. So stick around, and thanks for joining us. So I'm standing here at the most open part of the whole preserve. This is a 5-acre grassland tract that was cleared last year by our friends at Comprehensive Botanical Services. There were a lot of calorie pear here, a lot of woody vegetation that they removed and timber mulched, and just within a few months of that project we got a lot of our native plants coming back, particularly some grass species and our swamp milkweed, which is one of my favorite plants. So it's already turning into great pollinator habitat, and it's really good bird habitat too. We're here on the Underwood Loop right across from Clabber Creek, and so this is a great part of the property to see birds that prefer these open grasslands. Around the edges of the tract here, you'll see a lot of the birds that like more of the edge habitat. So you'll see eastern towhee, you'll see northern cardinal, indigo bunting, a lot of those species that prefer that edge. They come out here, they take some seeds, and then they fly back into cover. One of the species that we want to manage for and we'd like to see return is the Henslow sparrow, which I believe was last recorded in 2011. It's an Arkansas species of greatest conservation need, and we'd love to see that return. So hopefully with our management efforts here and clearing this area and keeping it open, we'll see those guys return someday. My favorite species to see here on this site are tree swallows. Tree swallows are insectivores, so they catch insects on the wing, and they're like little jet fighters, flying and swooping and catching insects as they go. Beautiful little bird. It's got a bright white underside. Its back and wings are this really cool iridescent kind of green and purple color. Very cool birds to see and watch in flight. One thing that's interesting about those is we do have those nesting here. So our friends at Northwest Arkansas Master Naturalists and the University of Arkansas have set up nest boxes and are doing a study across the whole property. So if you're out here and you see those nest boxes, those birdhouses on the poles, please leave those alone. They are part of a study that's ongoing out here. I would encourage you to watch those for a little while though, because you will see birds returning with insects for their young. Along with the tree swallows nesting in those boxes, we also get Carolina chickadee and tufted titmouse, eastern bluebird, which are really exciting to see out here too. So I encourage you to take a look at this area, spend some time birding out here. Underwood Loop goes around the whole outside of this tract. It is pretty rugged, kind of on the south side, so it can be wet at times. So if you come out here to bird this specifically, I would recommend having some rubber boots on to prepare to get a little wet if it has rain. But a great spot to bird, great part of the property. Likely to see a lot of different species when you're out here. So the wind's picking up a little bit. You might be catching some of that on the camera, but we're here now at what we call the Beaver Pond. So this is about a 3-acre pond that's right off of the Underwood Trail as you come in from the Dean Solomon roadside. It's basically right across from our kiosk here. A lot of people ask me what's up with the dead trees, and so historically this was a seasonally wet depression out here, and so it would be wet at certain times of the year and dry at the others. And beavers have come along and they've dammed a section of it and created a permanent body of standing water here. A lot of these trees out here have succumbed to being wet all the time and have died, and though unsightly at times, it's really good bird habitat right here. In the wintertime particularly is a great time to check out the Beaver Pond. We get hundreds and hundreds of ducks out here, many different species. Lots of mallards, blue-winged teal. We've seen northern shoveler out here, so a really good place to bird for ducks in the wintertime. November and December is a really good time to see them out here. You can get fairly close to along the trail going east. There's still some pretty good spots of dense tall vegetation out there, and so you can kind of sneak behind there and get really good looks at ducks. You can see a lot of wetland vegetation along the edges. This is really good habitat for grackles and red-winged blackbirds. We get great-blued heron on this side, green herons. They're skulking along here in the vegetation, and they're hunting for frogs and fish and that kind of stuff. We also have a wood duck box out here that we keep an eye on. We do have wood ducks on the property that nest every year. So I encourage you to spend some time here at the Beaver Pond and take a look. Good birds to see here all year round. So right across from the Beaver Pond, you'll find Clabber Creek, which runs east and west along the entire length of Wilson Springs Preserve, basically bisecting it. And you'll notice that depending on what time you're out here, the creek can look really different. Right now, in the summertime, you'll notice newfar or spatterdock, which grows out of the water and basically goes from bank to bank and through long stretches of Clabber Creek. The newfar grows as the water recedes in Clabber Creek. So during the hotter months or when we have less rain and the water goes down, the newfar then it starts to spread more rapidly. Newfar is really important as a fisheries nursery and for invertebrates. It also removes a lot of nutrients from the water column. Many of you may know that Wilson Springs takes in about 900 acres of developed stormwater input from the surrounding area. And as all that water comes onto Wilson Springs, it's carrying with it a lot of nutrients. Nutrients could be detrimental to water quality in Clabber Creek and also within the greater Illinois River watershed. So this newfar out here is actually taking up a lot of those nutrients and preventing those nutrients from being carried downstream on Clabber Creek. Now, depending on what time of the year you come out here, there's going to be more or less newfar in the creek, and that kind of changes the birds you're likely to see out here. In the late winter and early spring, when the water is more open, we get a lot of belted kingfishers, and they're very exciting to see and really cool to watch. So the kingfishers are, like their name suggests, they're eating fish and sometimes crayfish out of the water. And what they do is they sit along the bank on tree branches, and they're looking down into the water and looking for fish. And when they see one, they fly straight overhead and they almost hover for a second. They look down and then they drop straight down into the water and grab a fish, and then they'll fly back to the branch and eat it. Very fun bird to watch, very charismatic bird to watch, and you can hear their call all over the property during the early spring. As this newfar grows and as the water level goes down, the bird species composition changes a little bit, and we got a lot more herons. So great blue herons and green herons in particular, they're kind of doing the same thing. They're looking for fish and frogs and snakes to eat, although they do it a little bit differently. They walk along this newfar and they walk along the muddy banks searching for fish. They have pretty much figured out that the fish like the shady areas, so underneath the leaves. Green herons are also known to use their wings to shade, and so once they create that shade, the fish species come in for cover, and then the birds are free to nab them. So great blue heron, green heron, belted kingfishers, as well as some duck species that happen in the wintertime. Those are all species to look for on Clabber Creek during various times of the year. So our fourth and final habitat we'll talk about today at Wilson Springs Preserve is our woodland areas. I'm standing right off the Savannah Loop Trail, and as that name implies, we're trying to restore this area to savanna. Now remember, a savanna is a grassland with sparse chunks of trees throughout it. And so what does that mean as far as restoration goes? It means that a lot of the trees you see even in this shot will not be here in the future. And now I know it seems counterintuitive to want to take trees down as far as an ecosystem improvement goes. But what we're really trying to do is restore Wilson Springs back to a place it was a long time ago, which was a nearly treeless grassland. And even throughout this wooded area, you can still see the nebka, or the prairie mounds, which is evidence that at one time this was all tall grass prairie. Now we don't want to take every tree out, because trees are an important habitat for a lot of our resident bird species and a lot of our migratory bird species. So a lot of these old oaks and stuff, they will get left here just because they are good habitat, and the habitat is shrinking in Fayetteville and in the urban core of Northwest Arkansas as a whole. So we don't want to get rid of all the trees, but we want to get rid of quite a few. We want to encourage those native grasses and forbs and wildflowers to return to Wilson Springs Preserve, and the only way to do that is to eliminate some of the trees and a lot of the dense woody understory vegetation in order to allow sunlight to reach the ground. Now there's a lot of great species to see throughout the year here in these more wooded areas. Most exciting of all is during migration season. We get humongous flocks of all kinds of warblers that move through here. Black and white warblers and yellow rump warblers, Canada warblers, a whole host of them that come through here. And what's really cool about warblers is that they spend the winter time, they spend half their year in Central and South America, and then they fly across Arkansas, and they're headed north up as high as Canada near the Arctic Circle in some instances to rear their young. So when you see warblers out on the property, it's amazing to think about the thousands and thousands of miles that they've spent throughout the year just through the normal course of doing warbler business. So early in the springtime is a great time to see warblers and their breeding plumages. You'll also see them in the fall as they make the trip back south. Not quite as spectacular to look at. They get a lot harder to identify in the fall, but we do get them in that time of the year. We have a lot of resident birds that are really exciting to see too, woodpeckers in particular. We have a lot of species of woodpeckers out here. The pileated, which is the great big one, they're really hard to miss. Their calls sound like the Joker in the forest. They're awesome birds to see, and especially when you see a pair of them. Because we have so many dead trees out here and so many snags, it's great opportunities to find woodpeckers. We also have red-headed woodpeckers out here, red-breasted woodpecker out here, or excuse me, red-bellied woodpeckers out here, along with both hairy and downy woodpeckers and northern flickers from time to time out here too. So woodpeckers, they're pretty easy birds to spot and hear throughout the year. Other birds that are really fun to see out here, we have both barred and great horned owls out here. I've seen both species out here on the property. They're super awesome to find. If you come out here really early in the morning, you're likely to see one of those species. When they fly, they're almost silent, and they can sit camouflaged in a tree and you don't even know they're there until you're almost right up on them. And then they make that silent glide through the trees from tree to tree. So fun to see owls out here at Wilson Springs Preserve. Other species you're likely to see out here, we have a lot of the flycatchers, so eastern wood pewee, eastern phoebe, those are always fun birds to watch. They do this behavior called sallying. Well, they'll sit on a branch and they'll see an insect, they'll fly out, they'll grab the insect, and they'll swoop back to the branch to eat it. Very fun. They don't sit still for very long. Another awesome species to see, especially in the late winter, are our cedar waxwings. They flock in the hundreds and sometimes thousands, way high in the trees, and they have a really high-pitched call that remind me of baby birds a little bit. But when you see huge flocks of those guys, you know you've seen something cool. Their feathers are such a way that they almost look smooth, like they've been painted, and they have little red and yellow waxy tips on their wings, which are really cool. And then they have that really distinctive masking crest. So the cedar waxwing is one of my favorites to see out here. Another really cool thing, and I know we all think about them as yard birds, but American robins. Robins are thrushes, and they're more of a woodland species than we like to think of them as. But at certain times of the year, especially in the early spring, you'll see flocks of thousands of American robins out here, and their calls are almost deafening in the forest in the morning. Very cool to see those birds. And just a reminder that even the common birds that we see at our feeders in our yards, like Carolina chickadees and tufted titmouse and American robin, Carolina wren, house wren, those species are woodland species for the most part, and you know, we see them a lot in our homes and in our yards, but when you see them in a place like Wilson Springs, you really get a chance to observe them in a habitat that's more natural for them. So I'd like to thank you guys for sticking with me through these 3 videos. I know this third one came a little later than I was anticipating, but we got it done. Wilson Springs is a fantastic place to bird year-round. I encourage all of you to get out here and bird, whether you're into ducks or songbirds or raptors, whatever bird you geek out on, you can find some sort of species of it here at Wilson Springs Preserve. We are open to the public every day of the week, dawn to dusk. It can be a little rugged and a little wet out here at times, so I encourage you to check the weather. You don't want to be in these woodland areas when it's really windy. It can be very wet out here at certain times of the year, so just be prepared with rubber boots, be prepared to get a little bit of wet and mud. It can be really buggy out here in the summertime. It is a wetland, so just remember your bug spray. We do have ticks and chiggers and mosquitoes and flies and all that stuff out here, so a little bit more adventurous than some of our other city open spaces, but a lot of fun and very unique to Fayetteville and very unique to Northwest Arkansas.